Nebraska Preps postgame with Damon Benning and Jacob Padilla.
That's the big voice guy. That means it's another week with Jacob Padilla. I'm Old DB. It is Nebraska Preps postgame, one of the best in the business. A busy week. A lot to catch up on. We'll try to be efficient. We apologize in advance if we miss you. Well, we probably won't miss you, but maybe you won't get as much love as you'd like. But we'll continue to try to get better, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. It was a fun week. I got to see a lot of basketball. I think I topped out at 20 games last week between the various tournaments. So
that's a lot of action. And when you spend most of the time in the gyms these last couple of days, like we did, a little break is good. So we took the weekend, kind of compose, grab some notes, do a few things differently, adjust rankings accordingly. And then there were a couple of aha moments. Where should we start if you're looking for an aha moment? Do we go to Lincoln first?
I mean, I think it's up to you driving the ship, especially considering who ended up winning the one that's closer to where we are.
Yeah, but I kind of would like to go to the HVAC, right?
All right,
because we thought we liked Lincoln Northeast, right? We went over the seedings last week. We said, hey, Southwest is the 1, East was the 2, Pius was the 3, Northeast was the 4. And I looked at you, you looked at me, and you said, not quite a lot of respect for Northeast as the only undefeated team for the 4 seed, but people weren't in love with their schedule. You intimated it could be maybe due to the lack of, like, big-name star power. But, man, they just keep winning, and they're doing it with a total team effort as they knocked off both Southwest and Pius en route to winning that tournament.
Yeah, that was phenomenal teamwork, and they had different guys step up at different moments. It was pretty balanced in the semi over Southwest, and then in the final, it was G. Gatnor coming off the bench, going off for 19 points on 7 of 9 shooting, hit 3 threes. Hit a couple of clutch free throws late, had a breakaway layup after the team forced a turnover to kind of really seal it at the end. Although Pius, they didn't quit. They kept fighting down to the end, and they actually banked in a 3 that would have tied it, but it was clearly still in Brady Christensen's hands. So it was a good call by the officials to wave that off, and Northeast takes the crown, the 51-48 win on Thursday afternoon down at Lincoln Southeast.
What do you make of do you call it balance or not so much when you're looking at kind of how Lincoln has shook out so far?
Yeah, I think that's it's pretty good balance. I mean, most of those teams, I think, depending on the day, can go out and beat each other. Obviously, we've talked about the ones that look like they have the most talent on paper. We talked about the ones that have accomplished the most to this point. But I think this tournament showed that any of those top 4 teams, and then even a couple of those other ones, can jump up and give you a fight. So I think this is probably, in terms of top to bottom, as good as Lincoln's been in a while here in terms of the number of teams that are in the mix.
When you're taking a look at kind of how the final game shook out, what do you think Pius is kind of, I won't say missing because it's early, but you're trying to take a look at what you think that they can improve on. What do you think they're missing right now?
I think they've got to.
They were in everybody's preseason top 4, right?
Yep. And I think, one, they've got to settle in and kind of understand their own strengths and weaknesses and kind of figure out. I think just looking at that game, Sam Hostreiter, who's the best player on the team, is going to North Dakota State. He took 6 shots and 4 free throws. I believe, finished with 10 points. And that's just not enough. They've got to find a way. I think the other guys kind of let Northeast kind of bait them into taking a lot of shots that were tougher looks and that weren't falling on that night. Jack Hostreiter led him in scoring, but it took him 17 shots to get there. And Jared Bohr hit a big 3 late, but early in the game he wasn't knocking down shots. And so I think that's part of it. Is they've got to do a better job of kind of understanding what they're trying to do and playing through their best players and getting better looks. They just did not get enough quality looks on offense in that game. And Northeast was really kind of collapsing in the paint and throwing a lot of bodies at them. And we talk about kind of the strength of the team is the size and athleticism.
And their versatility, man.
Yeah.
This time it was, Wynn was kind of the Robin. There's always a second or third guy that kind of chips in and helps them get it done. Their balance is going to could be potentially tough to handle, man. It's somebody different every night. You mentioned Gott with what he did coming off the bench with 19. Hard to get a scouting report done when it's almost somebody different every night if you're a Rockets fan.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, again, the strength of the team. And G. Gatnor is who I think Coach Ritchie talked about. He started at Northeast as a freshman, then kind of his family moved and he went to Lincoln High and been there for the last couple of years, but decided, senior year, he wanted to go back to Northeast. And he's a guy that has been huge for them just with his ability to score efficiently off the bench. And I don't know how many double-figure games he's been now, but we talk about that balance, and it goes 1 through 6. And he's capable of leading them in scoring in any given game. We saw Carlos Valdez have a good game in the semis. We saw Christian Wynn have a good game in the semis. Again, it's just Xander Beard, I think, is a very capable scorer, and he hasn't even really had a whole lot of big games. He's capable of taking over for stretches if he needs to. Jalen Lang, I think, is just solid as a junior at the point guard, can really finish at the basket pretty well. So, and Porter Basil, we taled about him. He's probably the most talented player.
He's usually the guy that comes up the most, right?
And defensively, he's been a force, blocking shots left and right. He hasn't had a bunch of shots start to fall yet, but he's capable. So if he gets clicking, in addition to everything else they're doing, those guys are going to be a tough out.
What do you think? So I want to. Let's go outstate here not outstate, I guess western Nebraska for a second with a little 4-team scramble up in North Platte where there was a lot of familiarity. All 4 of those teams I know Elkhorn and Beatrice had seen each other in kind of that round robin triangular. I can't remember off the top of my head what North Platte had seen of those opponents, but Platteview, Elkhorn, and Beatrice were all familiar with one another, and Platteview comes out kind of unscathed.
Yeah, they 69-52 win over North Platte, kind of the host in the first game, and it was another big Connor Melkin game, 34 points, 9 boards, and then they got 19 points from Michael Wiebelhaus and 12 from Alex Draper.
Different team. You look at the point total with the third person in that trio, which is Wiebelhaus.
Yeah, and so that's how they win games. Like if you're looking at that, Platteview is going to win almost every single game they're in if you get that kind of score and distribution. Second game, though, Elkhorn, they're not nearly as talented as they were last year. You look at kind of the roster, and Dane Peterson's the only one really back that actually played last year. But Coach Benji Hayes done a good job defensively of just really fighting and scrapping with that 1-3-1. I haven't seen them yet. I'm assuming they're kind of sticking with that. Just really
when you hold Platteview in the high 40s, 48-43 final, I think was the final, you're going to give yourself a chance to win.
Yeah, and first, Elkhorn beat Beatrice 43-35 to get into that championship game. And they got 15 from Axel Prince, so I believe is the transfer, and Ethan Youngtum got 11. So those are your 2 leading scorers. And I think Peterson only had 7 points in that game, and they still got the win. And then, like you mentioned, 48-43, they hung around in it. They gave themselves a chance. And Milliken, 16 points on 4-16 shooting, 2 of 10 from 3. So they made his looks tough with that zone, with the way they play defense. Peterson at the rim is a great rim protector. But Alex Draper stepped up, 17 points on 6 of 10 shooting, including 5 of 9 from 3. So somebody needed to hit shots against that zone, and it looks like he was the one. So they got just enough to get out of there, but it's I think good confidence builder for Platteview after that. They were probably I'm sure they were hoping for another crack at Beatrice after the way that previous game went, but
just trying to handle Beatrice's post presence, which I think Juergens controlling the tempo that first time around, and then not necessarily Twin Towers, but really good inside presence from Beatrice really gave Platteview fits. I was kind of anxious for that to kind of see if that may present itself again. But do we know enough yet, in your opinion, about Platteview to separate, or we keep them lumped in with Ron Colley if we think that Scott is one, like I do in Class B.
I agree. I think they belong in that mix for sure. Just in terms of talent in Class B, they're just not a ton of depth in that class right now. And when you've got a guy like Connor Milliken and enough pieces around him, I think they belong firmly in that mix just in terms of over the long haul. But in Class B, anybody can jump up.
You put Orr and company ahead of them, or they've had some good wins with Ron Colley. I mean, that's a tough basketball team.
I went down to Ashland Greenwood for the tournament last week and pulled out a 72-70 overtime win over the Blue Jays, and then bounced back and just dominated 40-point win over Archbishop Bergen in the final. And then they closed out the week with a 63-52 win over Elkhorn North. So Ron Colley, it's a team
it's a really good week.
Yeah, it's a team that I need to go out and get. We'll talk about this later. There's some big games coming up this week. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this, but that's the team that I've got my eye on potentially getting out and seeing this next week. But Jake Orr, I think he had 20-something in that win over Ron Colley.
Quietly, he's one of the better basketball players across the state. You and I talk about him a ton, especially with regards to Class B and where he belongs. I think it's Milliken and definitely Orr kind of right there. He's such a good overall athlete. He is he's tough to handle.
Yeah. So I think great start for them. You talk about some of the better players in Class B. One head out west. That was the other one that we talked about in Class B, the Scottsbluff tournament. And
I had a feeling you were going to go there.
First round, Bennington took care of business over Hastings. Scottsbluff beat Lexington, so it kind of set up the final that we were hoping to see. And boy, did Scottsbluff dominate that game. 83-68 win over Bennington. It was 26-26 after the first quarter, and then they pulled away 25-14 in the second and then kind of cruised through the second half. And I mentioned him in the preseason, but Austin Thine, the transfer from Mitchell, 26 points. And then they got double digits from 4 other guys. Tyler Hari only had 13 points, but they got 17 from Kellen Harris and 10 apiece from Tate Talkington and Michael Mickey. So if they're getting those kind of contributions from those guys not named Thine and Hari, in addition to Thine doing what he's going to do, that's
about 26 apiece in that first quarter.
Yeah,
had to be highly, highly entertaining.
Oh yeah, and so Scottsbluff is now 4-0 against Nebraska teams after Chadron had been the only one they had played previously,
and had played them twice.
Yeah, so they're, I believe, 8-2 now. After that, and again, both losses are out of state. So that's a tough team. Not going to see a lot of them because kind of stick out there on the Panhandle. Not really going to venture around the Metro, but that's the team come state tournament time that I'm sure you'll see plenty of.
So we learned a little bit about Beatrice, still sitting there at 6-2. I think we like them as a basketball team, but their style of play, right? It's Juergens. It's a little bit of penetration. They've got good post presence. Actually, a good pair of post presence. Do we put them just outside of where we think Scottsbluff, Platteview, Ron Colley, where that section would be if there is separation from Scott and everybody else?
Yeah, that's a tough one with Beatrice beating Platteview and then losing to Elkhorn. It's kind of like the transitive property.
Because Elkhorn's right there at 500, but has played a tough schedule.
Exactly. So I think, that's probably, I think Beatrice is still in that top 5 mix. They're one of those teams that, just in terms of the talent and kind of what they've done thus far, they belong in that mix. I think I'd probably, you give me a series, I'd probably take a few of those other teams over Beatrice, but I've only seen a little bit of Beatrice at this point. So,
where to? Do you want to go Metro?
Yeah, I think we've hit on most of the other kind of big ones this week, so we might as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Let's start with the shot clock, right? Because there was a lot of talk about it and like what it would be, how to manage it, what it wasn't, what it was. I felt like for the most part, there's only a couple. There's one game in particular I think it really came into play, and that was Gretna Bellevue West, right, where I felt like Gretna just didn't have a chance to control tempo. Yeah. There were so many more possessions than I think they're accustomed to getting. It really manifests itself, and maybe a little with Westside and Elkhorn South, where that second half run that happened in the third quarter, where C.J. Mitchell and those guys, they kind of the tempo, they really got sped up for about that 6-minute increment where the game got away from them. Outside of that, I thought what would be was with the shot clock, and what wouldn't be was with the shot clock.
Yeah, overall, I don't think it had a huge noticeable impact. Then again, going from watching the shot clock games at the Metro to going down to the Hack finals and watching those games, I did notice a difference there late in the quarters and in the fourth quarter, which is really where the biggest impact is. It's not going to be possession to possession. Most possessions, kids get shots off before 30 seconds. But it's in those moments where coaches like to slow it down and really control tempo and run clock as opposed to just playing. That's when the impact is going to be. And I felt it made for a better product watching those games compared to what I saw down in the Hack.
Good point. You know where that really showed up, where I felt like it was a very long last minute and a half. That Central Bellevue West game was fantastic to see the cat and mouse of utilizing the clock when not to foul. The game was right around the 5-6 point mark, and so you looked, and if it's a minute 30, you're not really in a hurry to have to foul. You can play good defense with a possession. Central didn't have to really try to force the issue to get the ball back. The ends of quarters, I think, are where it really shows up.
Yep, and that's kind of the biggest deal when you see coaches. Sometimes I've seen it before the 1 minute mark, call for one possession, or they'll run through something and don't get anything to hit that 50-second mark, and they say, "Oh, pull it out, hold for one," and you can't do that. And again, in the fourth quarter, it does make those games more exciting, like you said, where a lot of times you see a team take a 7-8 point lead in the fourth quarter, and you feel like it's going to take a huge effort just to get back into this because they're going to run clock, they're going to really stall, and eventually you're going to have to foul as opposed to just playing. Now you have to keep playing up until the final minute, and that's a huge difference, and I think it does improve the game. And there weren't a ton of shot clock violations. I think Sauter tracked it throughout, but there was probably less than one a game if you look at all the games total.
Completely agree. And that was their most,
and there were only
96 hours.
Yeah, and there were only a couple mistakes between the officials, the shot clock operator. Like, it wasn't a big deal. I thought they pulled it off pretty well. And 35, I think, is a good number for high school. I think that's, again, if you can't get a shot off within 35 seconds, then you probably weren't going to get a good shot off if you take another 30.
Right.
Like, at that point, you've done everything you're going to do on a possession. So I wondered how much like pressing would kind of play into that, try to run down the clock, and there was some of that, but it wasn't a huge. I don't think there were a lot of teams that don't press that were pressing. Mostly, I think a lot of teams did what they normally do.
Yeah, well, let's go all the way back to the quarters. Because I think we were together on Monday, which meant that we had the Tuesday games, the Wednesday games, then the day off on Thursday, which was kind of a travel day for us, and then Friday. Let's go back to Tuesday. What kind of stuck out in your head as you kind of recap those quarterfinal games in your head?
Yeah, I think obviously the Central Prep game was the most interesting one. And man, we talk about Creighton Prep and all the injuries they've dealt with.
Unbelievable.
And they lost more guys. Sean Ramachandran was out. Eddie Hubner was out. Like, they just keep losing guys. They get one back and lose two more.
Yeah. And
they just couldn't quite get going. Luke Jungers finished with 9 points. They couldn't quite get him established.
It's a curious case study.
Yeah. Martell Evans tried to keep them in that game. Huge second half after a really slow first start to try to get them back into it. But in the end, Jay Dawson was the best player on the floor, and that ended up being a huge difference maker.
I want to get to him in a second. With that first quarter that he had against Bellevue West, you may not see a better 8-minute performance than what I felt like Dawson was doing in that first quarter. And that lent itself to some high degree of difficulty of shots later in that game. But man, when he gets cooking, he's got the full repertoire. The Central, in my opinion, even more so than Millard North, who was better early than I saw them late. Miller North and Central are interesting, right? And for the same reasons, but in different ways. The backcourt, right? For Central, I think they have some keys there. I like DeAndre Brody. He's not going to go out and get you, 16, 17 a night on the regular. But when he takes care of the basketball and they get good quality possessions, that's a good basketball team. Like, I think they're capable night in, and you saw it against Bellevue West, right? Now PJ Davis got hot, really started to find a way to get to the 10 that kind of changed the way that they played. But that backcourt, if they handle it well, I think it's a very dangerous basketball team. Miller North, on the other hand, without getting much scoring from their backcourt sometimes, I felt like Westside really suffocated that backcourt as a whole. They just could not get good looks.
Well, and if you want to turn there and just talk about Westside's kind of trip through the whole tournament, and I wasn't feeling great watching them play Elkhorn South. You saw it through the first half. They kind of sleptwalked through there. Weren't making great decisions. The intensity wasn't there. And it just felt like we talked previously after the Miller North, like, these guys are clearly good, but are they in that top tier? Do they have enough to compete for a state title this year? With everything they brought back, are these guys ready to take the step forward? And didn't feel like that way early in the season. And then you come out that Elkhorn South game, and they kind of struggled through that. They eventually pulled away in the second half.
It's far from impressive. I agree.
Flipped the switch, second half, finally started guarding a little bit, and that's where it all started. And then
even Miller North was a little choppy until there was about a 6-7 minute stretch where I felt like it got away from Miller North.
Yeah, and credit to Westside, Coach Jim Simons, the whole team for kind of the adjustment they made and the better execution defensively. Yeah. They completely took David Harmon out of the game.
It's the whole deal.
He put up 24 on them, got in the paint at will last time. They did a great job of icing the ball screens, sending guys into the gaps. Really, he had nowhere to go. He did a good job of getting in the paint and making some threes, or kicking it out for some threes early in the game. Finished with 5 assists, but in the second half, he just was really completely taken out of it. And none of those other guys stepped up. They didn't get anything out of Jackson Page.
Dolezal didn't shoot it well. Didn't get much from Mosser.
Yeah, and Elijah Gaith and Isaiah McMorris off the bench made some plays, but then they weren't able to kind of finish down the stretch. They had some opportunities and kind of missed out. But Jason Green, he almost dragged them back single-handedly.
Whether it was the offensive rebounds, the putbacks, the grab and goes,
the give me that block at the rim. Like he hit a 3 there in the fourth quarter. That was big. It's almost
like whenever he gets ready. The 3 from deep where you're like, you felt a little run coming. He almost single-handedly kept them in it. He was fantastic, in my opinion, in the loss against Westside. He was way good.
It finished with 26, 13 boards, 5 blocks, 2 steals. He was the best player on the court.
Yeah, no question.
But you had West. I think what Westside is starting to do is kind of settle in and figuring out how they can be their best selves.
Yeah,
and guys are stepping into roles where Tate Advadi is the number one option, the scorer. Let him go get his 20 every single game. You need Chandler Meeks, not necessarily to be the 20-point scorer. You need him to step up for stretches when things aren't going well.
That's the thing, right, is to kind of share those responsibilities. And a really good offensive coach like Coach Simons adjusting and kind of understanding they could really get after you defensively.
Yeah.
And that's – It changes with them when they guard.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the final in a second here, but Meeks had 13 points in the second quarter when nothing else was really going, and that was huge. He finished with an efficient 17 points. Again, that's what you need. You need him to step up for stretches, not necessarily to be the best player on every single possession. You need Reggie Thomas making the hustle plays, not necessarily being the number one option running the show offensively. You need him to go rebound, defend, attack the basket when the opportunities are there. And then you need just enough of those other guys. It was C.J. Mitchell in the first 2 games. It was Logan Wilson in the final. Payson Gillespie had some big plays. So if you can get enough out of those guys, obviously the defense off the bench, Charlie Davis came in and knocked down a couple of shots that were important. in the last 2 rounds. So if you can get, again, that Tate scoring his 20, you got Chandler having a big quarter here and there, and then everybody else defending collectively, that's how Westside is going to win. And that's exactly what we saw in the final. If you want to look ahead to that against Bellevue West.
That's interesting, too, because I said a couple weeks ago, and I obviously have a little bit of an advantage because I see him all the time, and I can compare. But remember when I said Tate's really starting to come into his own, understanding how and where to be in that offense. You could just slowly start to see it come. Last year, I didn't think he was very healthy, number one. And number two, just it's so hard to offense to kind of get comfortable in. They made a lot of little off-season adjustments. They really know how to create space for him.
And he's got such a unique game. Like,
isn't it weird?
I don't really have a comparison for him. The way he extends, the finishes.
He plays below the rim, but he gets a lot of shots at the paint.
Yeah, and the way
not an elite level ball handler. He understands angles, and he is he is as crafty a finisher as you'll see.
Yeah, and they had 2-3 of those possessions where the ball was absolutely popping, flying around. I know one ended up with Payson Gillespie, they're like 10 passes on a play, and then the big one with Chandler Meeks for the 3.
Yeah, that
was probably the best possession that I saw the entire tournament.
Yep. When they share it in guard, they're the best team.
And that second part is the key. Like, they were physical right out of the gates with Bellevue West, and if you didn't see, it was a 76-68 final, I believe, in that one for Omaha Westside, and it was tight down in the fourth quarter, and then they pulled away. There was technical, some free throws late. So it was closer than that final score indicates.
Yeah, although I did feel like about the third quarter, it was about 6-7 points throughout, roughly. And it's interesting because I watched Central and Bellevue West 2 days before, where clearly William Kyle III and Josiah Dotzler took that game over, right? Yeah. For as good as P.J. Davis was late and the timely scoring from Jay Dawson, we ended up shooting a better percentage than I would have thought in my head. I think he was like 7 of 16.
Well, yeah, he got off to a really good start and then was a little quieter in the second half.
Yeah, did he? It seemed like he made like his first 5 shots. Yeah, and a couple of them, he showed you the full gamut. I was like, ugh.
3 out of 3 from 3 right out the gates.
The pull-up off the step back where he first oohed and awed the crowd, and then when it goes in, it's like, this guy's pretty good.
Yeah, 15 in the first half, finished with 20. So that was a big deal, kind of not really getting Bellevue West did a good job of kind of limiting his opportunity in the second half. But
so going in on that scouting report, I was like, okay, Josiah is he's gonna get his. He's very hard to guard, right? His change of pace. I thought Kyle was gonna be the key because they didn't really have a great matchup for him defensively. Yeah. But how big was Logan Wilson?
And so from the start, Westside did a great job of getting up in Bellevue West's face.
Yep.
1 through 5.
Yep.
The pressure was relentless at every possession. And you could see early on, they really got in Dotzler's head and he tried to do too much early on. And other guys weren't getting involved. He was taking some tough shots. They weren't falling. I thought he was much better in the second half, settle in and playing a little bit better style. But at that point, they were already down, and they never had other guys get going. William had a good second half, but outside of that, they never really got a third score. I mean, John Mitchell was their third leading scorer, or I guess Jay and Jackson hit those free throws late, but they just didn't quite get enough out of those other guys. None of them were ready to deal with that pressure to be able to go make a play to make those shots under pressure. And defensively, they got it into Kyle. I mean, you look in the first half a couple of times where he tried to go one-on-one on Wilson, and nothing happened. Like, he could not take advantage of that matchup. So that was a great job by Wilson. And then on the other end, Wilson hit 4 threes, went 4 of 8, finished with 14 points.
When he plays well, I'm not going to say unbeatable, but when Logan plays well, they're almost impossible to slow down offensively because he stretches you, because he can shoot from distance. He can put it on the deck, but when he's on the perimeter, he gives you so much space. He makes it able for you to turn the corners and for those guards to put the ball on the deck, because their dribble, drive, and kick game, they've got it down to a science. And he gets so many good open looks.
Yeah.
Right? You can't take it all away. They literally have, 7-8 guys and get you anywhere from 8 to 20 a night.
So I think key defensively, Jay and Jackson 0 of 4 from 3. You need him hitting shots.
He's gotten off to a tough start so far this year for as good a player as he is.
And Jackson Stuvey, Evan Inselman, and TK Barnett combined 7 points and 5 turnovers between those 3.
Far be it from us, right? Coach Woodard has forgotten more basketball than you and I. Well, maybe me, but you will ever know. But those rotations, I'm not sure. He's got a couple of those guys, and just playing with Jaden Jackson so long, and I think Stuvey's a lot like this too, where they need to be in a rhythm. And playing so many guys, I think it's hard for those really good shooters that don't put it on the deck a ton to kind of get in a little shooting rhythm. I think it's tough, but shoot on a given night, he could play 10, 11 guys if he wanted to.
Yeah, and that's what they've been doing. Steady 10 guys. They've stuck with the same rotation, whether it's they're playing a lower level team or they're playing in the Metro Final. It's the same thing again, kind of stuck with that rotation. He's trusting those young guys that are
a lot of guys to keep happy, especially with Jacob Arope not even dressing yet.
Yeah, that's going to be the other thing. Like we're seeing Robbie Garcia get a lot of playing time with Arope playing with JV, but I assume he'll be back here pretty soon. I mentioned John Mitchell. I thought he was the one guy that kind of felt comfortable, that was aggressive, that went out and made some plays off the bounce. And that's kind of what Westside's pressure did. They took those guys out of there. They made them uncomfortable. And that's what led to Josiah feeling like, all right, I got to go do this on my own. And again, in the second half.
You can run a Benning, a Mitchell. You can run. They just were throwing all those bodies at that backcourt. And I thought, I was talking to Josiah's dad. He said something interesting on the escalator coming down that I didn't really think of, because you don't really think of it with Westside. He said, in watching that Millard North game, the one thing that stuck out to me was Westside's physicality. You have big, strong body types. He said that gave him concern heading into it, because when you look at the builds, he just didn't see that in Bellevue West. And I've been fooled in that before, right? Remember, you and I were together at Pius Bellevue West last year. I'm like, wow, Pius's body types. You could, they were just, even the Hoibergs, who aren't tall, were just big and strong. Now, eventually, it didn't matter much, but they do have some smaller, I would say more slight body types. The physicality was extremely noticeable, and they kind of did it to Millard North too, with some slighter guards, right, with McMorris and Elijah. Or Eli and Mosser, where they touch and clutch and bump and they get underneath you. It's very, very disruptive.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about. That's the way they need to play. That's how they have to be successful with their roster makeup. And they hadn't always done that, I think, to start the season. They definitely did it the last 2 rounds of the tournament, and that's why they're champions.
So as we get ready to put a bow, and I'm sure we'll hear the music here in a second. When you look at the top 5, let's start in Class A. You go Westside 1. Who's 2?
I think still Bellevue West.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think if they're playing their best and Millard North's playing their best, I still would take Bellevue West. Who's 3?
Well, Millard North. So those 3.
Is Central not interesting to you?
They're interesting. They're probably the number 4 there, just based on what we've seen from the others. I don't know that any of those Lincoln teams have showed enough.
Yeah.
Northeast. So Northeast Central, that's probably the
next
the
dog
conversation there for the 4 and 5 spots.
Well, let's go top 5 Class B real quick. Scott, you start with. And we got to get to them. They played so few games. I got to get in my Jake talk and everybody else.
So what I was this week, both Bellevue West and Millard North play Council Bluffs Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And on Monday, or Tuesday rather, it's AL and Bellevue West, and Roncalli and Platteview play each other. And on Thursday, or Friday rather, it's it's AL against Millard North and Scud at Roncalli. So I've got to, all right, I want to see one of those AL games. I got to decide which one of those days I want to go to the AL
Scott
game.
Roncalli should be fantastic.
Which I want to go to the Class B game. because I like I said, I want to see Roncalli this week. So that's going to be a tough decision, kind of decide which way to go. But yeah, I do. At some point here, I got to see Scott. They're 7-0, the only undefeated team in Class B,
and there's only one undefeated team in Class A.
Yeah, so
in Lincoln Northeast.
Yeah, after that, man, Roncalli, Platteview, Scottsbluff, probably in some order, are the other top four, and then fifth, Beatrice I guess.
Maybe,
yeah, because Bennington's kind of had some big losses here that I think knocked them down. Waverly hasn't quite gone off to a great start this year.
And Elkhorn is kind of tucked in there, playing right around 500, but it's had the tough schedule.
Yeah, Blair's 6-3 is a team that made the state tournament last year with that great run and brought most of those teams back. So they're probably in that top 10 mix. Don't know what to think about some of those other Western teams. Like Sydney is off to a 9-1 start, but McCook is 7-2. So those are teams that are kind of in that mix record-wise that I haven't seen any of yet myself. So yeah, B is, I mean, it's tough to sort through.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep you covered. It should be a fantastic next Monday with all the big matchups that we previewed. That's Jacob Padilla. I'm ODB. We'll be back next week with Nebraska Preps postgame.
A Hurrdat Media Production.